Good day, I'm Fanny LaRue. Welcome to Fanky's Theological Tantrums. This is my conclusion to the series on women in the church, although regarding certain things I may make more. But this is my conclusion. In 6 videos, I read 3 of my honors theses. These theses were on women in the church offices. May women be ministers, pastors, and or elders? I believe that women may become and be ministers and elders. I provide my reasons in the 6 videos. Are my reasons valid? I believe so. You, the person watching the videos, can listen at least understand where I come from, if you want to. Some of the reasons I provided can be researched much deeper. I did not explain all of it. Some I just mentioned. The word count were fenced, so I needed to be short and sweet. And yet, I'm sad about this issue. Because of the situation in the faculties, the seminariums of the Dutch Reformed Church, DRC, the mourners, in Afrikaans, doelerendes, they mourn about what is going on in the DRC, in the Dutch Reformed Church, decided or proposed that people who want to become ministers must go and study at the seminariums or faculties of other denominations. 2 were provided. But neither the Reformed Church, Gereformeerde Kerk in Afrikaans, nor the APK, the Afrikaans Protestant Church, allow women in the church offices. Women cannot study to become ministers at all through the APK. And then race is also an issue at the APK. Where should women that want to become ministers go for education? Or put differently, where should women who were called by God and so equipped by the Holy Spirit go to be educated? I studied through SATS, the South African Theological Seminary. And though quite a few of the facilitators are against women in the church offices, women may receive the same education as their male counterparts. But would such qualified women be allowed or accepted? And how long will SATS keep standing theologically? Or will they also end up being liberal? When I read comments by the DRC mourners, it appears as if many, if not most, are against women in the church offices. Now the question is, what will happen if they are successful in the Article 37 of the DRC Constitution to form a separate synod, or even, if necessary, divorce from the Dutch Reformed Church, or tear away from it? Will this separate synod or church again prohibit women from holding church offices? Then those women ministers that still preach and teach the truth are in a terrible predicament. What would become of them? Also, what about someone like me, a man that believes that women may hold the church offices? In most denominations, I and others that believe like me, and obviously women trained as ministers, are unwelcome heretics. In many others, I am rigid and fundamentalistic. And in others, the charismatics and Pentecostals, I'm just not baptized in the Spirit. In 2021, after the video of the legitimation farce in Stellenbosch, the fact that the heretical statements were made by women were most often pointed out. Most of the comments then used this fact to say that women should not hold the church offices. Some of those comments were very nasty. In my book, I already remarked on this and bluntly responded. Now I must come back to this issue. On 16 January 2022, Ferdinand Mulder began an Afrikaans video series on women in the office, Vrou in die Amp. Videos 1 and 2 are available on his Evangelische platform, evangelical platform YouTube channel. He is against women in the church offices and uses Kostenberger. Kostenberger believes as Grudem and Piper and other great theologians. Ferdinand is a theologian whom I respect. He is also far more educated and qualified than I. His theology is of high quality. Go and watch his videos. Note that most are in Afrikaans. I recommend it. Ferdinand's temperament is calm and collected. I am emotional and easily excitable. This difference is easily and clearly seen in our respective videos. And yet now I agree with Ferdinand. And I must disagree with the majority of conservative theologians. I am not as well qualified. I do not have his or their experience. Maybe I'm just a heretical fool. But I did make my case and state my case. And I must also respond to Ferdinand's videos. Even though I did not use Kostenberger in my thesis, I did use Grudem, Piper and other complementarian sources. And they believe the same thing. Ferdinand's first video starts with parts of videos or excerpts of videos where liberal women ministers or pastors from a variety of denominations, including the DRC, make heretical statements. What these women ministers or pastors say is clearly evil. One issue I briefly discuss in my first thesis is trajectory hermeneutics. And Ferdinand and also other complementarians, I mentioned examples in my videos, go all out on this issue and with this point. Both of Ferdinand's videos as of 14 February 2022 use this as base. Now women are allowed in the church, then homosexuality and any other so-called gender. Again, I must ask, is it necessarily so that when women are allowed to hold church offices, that homosexuality and other so-called genders would or must become acceptable? It appears as though this is true, doesn't it? This is what happened again and again, isn't it? And this is what happened in the DRC, in the Dutch Reformed Church, isn't it? But I challenge the above belief. If God drew a line and I step over the line, then I am to blame and I am guilty. Where does God's line concerning women in the church offices lie? Where does it lie? Most conservatives believe that the line is drawn so that women may not hold the church offices. I believe it is drawn so that women may hold these offices. God drew the line. I ask, if the church has not followed God's line for the last nearly 2,000 years, but drew their line and followed it, that women may not hold church offices, why may or mustn't or shouldn't the church repent and redraw their line or its own line to fit God's line? Or if the church then goes beyond God's line, therefore then allow or start allowing homosexuality and any other so-called gender, who is guilty? Is it those that redrew the line to follow God's line by allowing women in the church offices? Who stepped over the line? I rigidly believe that there are no grey areas regarding or concerning God's right and God's wrong. Therefore, this side of the line is right, the other side is wrong. To connect the line of women in the church with the lines concerning homosexuality and other so-called genders is a human choice. These lines are not one and the same. In this instance, those who believe that women may not hold the church offices are blending the lines. In another video excerpt, Ferdinand plays later in the first video, it is then the liberal side that wants to just blend all God's lines. A woman minister said in 2019 that if we, or the DRC, did not allow homosexuality, we could just as well drop or let go of all the other things the same female minister listed, such as, for example, church unity, and so on. Just another straying women minister. And this specific women minister was one of the first women ministers in the DRC. Was or is the prohibition of women in the church offices God's fence? Or is it a human fence? If I notice that my fence, is not in the correct place, then it follows logically that I must move my fence to the correct place. Does this mean automatically that I'm just removing the fence? No, I move the fence to the correct place. But what complementarians are doing is to just say that if I move the fence, then I just remove the fence. Another way this is put is that the dam wall or embankment broke when women were allowed to hold church offices. But now the question is, did the dam wall or the embankment really break at that moment, at that time? Or did it break when the DRC admitted that apartheid is sin? Well, this is what the RPK believes. Or did the dam wall, the embankment, break when the complementarian view became popular? Therefore, in civil society, women may teach others, such as being a professor, etc., or be judges, and hold other professional offices, such as medical doctors, attorneys or lawyers, etc. Thus, with a complementarian position, therefore nearly replaced the totalitarian position. Nearly, but not completely, almost, not completely. Or must I take this back even further into the past and say that Luther, or perhaps Calvin and others, broke the dam wall, the embankment? But now I'm going to take the wall, the embankment, and turn it around. And I ask, if the ancient church's sinful prohibition on God-called and spirit-gifted women holding church offices did not break the dam wall, the original dam wall or embankment. Yes, and then Ferdinand also discussed Galatians 3 verse 28. I investigated and discussed what he and other complementarians believe in two of my theses 1 and 3. Did I answer their views? Did I handle it biblically correct? I hope and believe so. But I'm just a little old honors degree holder, and maybe my reasoning was flawed in places. Therefore, I am now a feminist and a follower of feminist theology. If I am in any way still a theologian. But what is feminism? If I follow God's line on this issue, and if God's line is where I believe it is, that means women may be ministers in the church. Then feminism must be redefined and looked at. I say again, as I did in my videos, the church is not a marriage. There are men and women, one man and one woman, who are in the church and are married. NB, please note, a man and a woman married. And then they have sex in their marriage. No, the two genders do not disappear in the church, but in the church, which is not a sexual relationship and also not a marriage, the two genders are not judged or looked at. There is no Jew or Gentile, or Jew or Greek, slave or free, or man or woman in the church, in Jesus' body. These things do not influence or may or can influence who may or can be appointed to all church offices. Now again, it is people's choice to step over the line and bring or drag in so-called genders and homosexuality. Where people commit adultery and other sexual sins, then the two genders are looked at. Where marriage is concerned, gender, the one man, one woman are looked at, male and female. Also, in his second video, Ferdinand again asked why only men were apostles. Did I answer this biblically in my videos? He specifically mentions when the apostles and the church had to vote for a replacement of Judas Iscariot. There were only men's names given, not women's names. I answered this issue. A few more observations. Number one, after I recorded the videos of my second thesis, on Deborah, I read that, same as Calvin, Luther also compared the office of minister or pastor to the office of prophet in the Old Testament, not to the priestly office. Number two, in his video, Vrouwen in die Kerk 1, Ferdinand mentions in passing that the woman minister who blends those lines in the short excerpt is married. Her husband is also a minister in the DRC, in the Dutch Reformed Church, and he, same as she, believes that homosexuality, etc. is right and must be allowed in the church. Therefore, the woman is not the only one of the two that's strayed. Number three, I ask again, may it really be stated that the women ministers believing, teaching and making slanderous and heretical things and comments of these Ferdinand used some as introduction to his first video, or as what happened during the legitimation farce in Stellenbosch, is proof that women may not serve in the church offices. Are these women proof of the so-called removed fence or broken down wall or embankment theory? No. First, who taught and trained these women? Most of the time, in the DRC at least, these educators, thus professors, the curators, the curatorium there are in each area and in one main one. They are the guys in charge. And the lecturers, these guys were all men. These women learned most of their false doctrine and their false teachings from men. Yes, since a few years ago, or a decade or so ago, there are also women professors. But those women professors learned from straying male professors, and or were allowed to just believe what they believe, just as their male professors during their own education and training were also allowed to believe what they believe, and were still anyway legitimated. One of the facilitators at the training which I went to in 2020 told us explicitly and bluntly, he went to his professor when he was just a student and told him that he doesn't agree with the church faith statements anymore. He was legitimated and signed those things. All the DRC, the Dutch Reformed Church faculties, are liberal. Their professors, etc., have been liberal for at least 2 decades. In some fields, it is longer. All these false teacher students learn false heretical doctrines and teachings. And this situation was accepted and permitted to continue under male oversight or supervision by mainly men. It is very nice, very lekker, to say the straying women is a sign that women may not be in church offices. Are the straying men also a sign of men's competence? Also, for quite some time, all ministers of the DRC have been expected and are expected to earn a certain number of points. Ministers, every year they must attain a certain number. Ministers who refuse can be removed or suspended. What happens to candidate ministers that refuse? Or brand new ministers? In 2020, when I was part of the Dienstleraar group, direct translation service ministers, until I had to choose between my rigid faith and legitimation, we were told that we, and I think all candidate ministers and new ministers, would have had to earn 100 points for each year for 3 years. Normal ministers, after that, it's 50 points as far as I can remember. Who facilitate these training events and who then run the training? Who trains the people? The liberals. The overwhelming majority of these events are facilitated by liberals, and liberals teach the people. Therefore, how many women ministers, together with their male counterparts and colleagues, have been brainwashed by liberals over the last number of years? Also, I must ask bluntly, where were the conservatives during this time? How many conservative training events were held in the same period? If there were any such conservative training events, would conservative women candidate ministers and ministers have been welcome? Where were they? And then one can also ask, how many points are allowed? And remember, the main curatorium, or people in the main General Synod, at the top of the General Synod, decide, or one of its subcommittees decide how many points each event can then give to the attendees. If they were conservative training events, how many points could they give as opposed to how many the liberals could give? Now, how many students and even ministers could or would stand and stay standing under the onslaught mentioned above? Training first, you're studying, and then further training, or continuous training. Both women and men. How many could remain standing? Number 4, complementarian circles. In complementarian circles, a lot are made of, and contradictory statements are made regarding the so-called fact that women are easier to deceive, the deceivability of women. You see, Eve proved it in the garden, didn't she? Oh, but if dear Adam were just there to supervise her. That is why men must supervise women, and why women may not hold church offices. But this does not reflect the true state of affairs or the facts. What occurred in most of church history clearly shows that men can be deceived just as easily. And just like female ministers who are straying now and proclaiming their false teaching, so these deceived men did also and still do. For the over majority of history. of church history. And in every congregation, there are elders, aren't there? For most of history, all elders were men. Oh yeah, they supervised the church and everything was true and correct under their leadership, wasn't it? But then women came and messed in the church's rules, and they become ministers and elders. Just look what the mess they caused in the church. Farce, nonsense, lies. It is the woman you gave me, it is her fault. The snake is at fault. We wash our hands in innocence. Just look at the beam in the woman's eyes, or in the woman's eye. There are both women and men who are and were and are misled. And there are and were both men and women who consciously made the choices to stray. And the obverse of that, or on the other side, there are both women or both men and women who made the choice not to stray, not to be deceived. Number 5. Ferdinand quotes C.S. Lewis at the end of the second video. I ask, whom must we look at or look to, even when a minister, whether man or woman, preach or teach? So the first thing we must look at during a service or official training, according to the reasoning of the excerpt, and also my complementarian friends, is whether the person teaching us or preaching is a man or a woman. Oh yeah, and this must then form and influence our views of God or our faith in God. Therefore, if a woman teach us or preach, we must conclude that we can address God as mother. And for this reason I may therefore, the moment a woman should dare to preach or attempt to teach us something during a service, close my eyes and pray the whole time that I would please just not fall for her heresy, or even that God would please just remove her. Really? I thought we must judge the message, the sermon, or the teaching, the doctrine of whomever teaches us. Oh yeah, and we must do that according to the Bible. We must keep Jesus in front of our eyes. We keep our eyes on Jesus. Jesus as the Bible teaches us. Thus, Jesus the Son of God, not the daughter of God because the woman standing there. It is very nice, very likely to say that when a woman should teach us, or preach to us, we may then address God as mother. It is a choice to step over the lines and continue further. I therefore strongly disagree with C.S. Lewis's reasoning as provided in the video excerpt, and I believe I may not agree with you. Number 6. So well, again, now I also agree with C.S. Lewis, as I disagreed with Calvin in my one video. And then I also disagree with Grudem and Piper and so on. And therefore also with Kostenberg. Ish. Number 7. To make a bunch of excerpts of videos of straying women ministers and pastors, of their straying proclamations, and to play it at the beginning of a video series on women in the church offices is misleading. And both men and women are misled by it. Number 8. In one video, Ferdinand tells us that he asked his wife and 1 or 2 other women their opinions regarding this issue, or rather regarding whether they agreed with him. And he asked them if they agreed with his view. That means the complementarian view. And they agreed with him. Now I'm going to discuss a few sides of this issue. First, in short, the complementarian view is that women may not preach or teach in the official church services or any other official teaching event. And they may also not judge the message or teaching during these events. But there are now women who are professors and doctors in biblical subjects, and they and others who are not teach people through their books, lectures and classes, both on the internet and physically. Some of the messages on the internet are nothing less than sermons. Others are deep exegetical teaching research, and male students and members and non-members learn just like their female counterparts from the above-mentioned women. What these women teach influence and form the faith of students and hearers, including men. If some of those men hold church offices, most of you will find that what they learned from these women, you will find it in what they teach their congregations, etc. And these women's teachings can influence and form the faith and official doctrines of the whole church. These women judge the interpretations of and make decisions regarding God's truth and teach it to others. They judge others' views and positions concerning God's truth and teach it to others. And depending on their students or hearers or watchers, and even where those women work, they have far greater influence on what the church believes than the hour or two, or even the occasional few hours teaching events. Many congregations limit their pastors to a sermon of about 20 minutes. Concentration, you know. Second, Ferdinand asked his wife, etc., for her to judge his position concerning God's truth regarding the women in the church offices debate. Now one can split hairs and say just ask their opinion regarding this issue. But the fact is that these women must weigh Ferdinand's position against God's word. They are Christian, are they not? Therefore, they must judge whether Ferdinand's message, his teaching, is true. Any Christian, man or woman, must first weigh their opinions and positions against God's word. A woman may not judge the minister's sermon, his message or his teaching in the official service or at official church events. This is what the most complementarians believe. But outside of these official church events, it certainly is right and acceptable and allowable for women to judge church messages and doctrines, therefore the interpretations of God's truth. And they may then express their judgment or opinions on these. And now I must ask, the videos that Ferdinand made, no, a church did not officially sanction them. But how does God view his training videos? It's official God's business. May a woman then judge this? Now, the comments of the women are then they are made public. Ferdinand made public what his wife and the others said. And these comments are then used to influence and form people's faith in God and positions about his truth. Ferdinand uses his wife's, etc.'s agreement with his position to teach other Christians, and specifically to show Christian women who may even just attempt to say they have a God's calling to be a minister or pastor, etc., that, oh no, even Christian women agrees with the complementarian position. If something is right according to God, people's, including women's acceptance or a man's acceptance of it, or rejection of it, thereof, makes no difference to our duty to do it. If God's truth is that women may not hold the church offices, then the egalitarian reasoning and Christian women following thereof or agreement with it is irrelevant. However, if God's truth is that women may serve in the church offices, then the complementarian objection and even Christian women's agreement with this position is irrelevant. What is true? Third, I'm now going to approach this issue from a different angle. For decades, the DRC taught its members and others that apartheid is right. And then the DRC repented and admitted that apartheid is sin. However, it is far more difficult to make people who have been indoctrinated for decades and also grew up with it realize and believe that apartheid is sin. And then to get them to live out this so-called new truth. Because that's what it's called by some. When the church repent, oh no, you said apartheid is wrong, but that's new. The fact is that it's always been true. The church were straying. The church lied. But people don't believe it. Now people believe that the church is proclaiming a new truth. Even though many members of the DRC left and went to the RPK and other denominations, there are still people in the DRC who believe that apartheid is right. One may not approach these people to comment on God's truth, because some of them will still say that apartheid is God's truth. But apartheid is a sin. For nearly 2,000 years, women had been prohibited from holding the church offices. Most people in the church were brought up this way and are still taught this, regardless of the fact that it appears that Ferdinand wasn't aware of this. This is overwhelming. Now, these people believe this, and as opposed to apartheid, there are now actually three positions on this issue. And then the DRC came and said that just as apartheid, this fact is also now and was a sin. It was a sin to prohibit women from holding the church offices. But many people still believe what they were taught and they're still being taught. And many of these people will not change what they believe regarding this issue. Even professors, even great theologians may not. Will I? In many cases, it even does not really matter what the ministers try to teach their congregations, as most members have their own opinions and believe and act accordingly. This is true regarding many other issues as well. Members who really want to search the internet, or they go to other congregations or denominations to get the information. Why would we trust our minister? What does he know? How many search for quality sources? How many rather just search and find information on the internet that they like, or information from other sources that they like? How many choose to think about and evaluate what the sources say? Oh yeah, and what the Bible also says. Compare the things. Oh no, but we know the Bible. Don't we, Reverend? What can you teach us? May I approach such members for comments on whether it is right for women to hold offices, church offices? May I ask these members at all about God's truth? Or what God's truth is? Now this issue is of course complicated, even more when one sees how ministers in one denomination differ on interpretation and living. Who should the everyday members believe? Which minister or pastor proclaims the truth? Or maybe my truth, which I like. How must they know? At universities on DRC campuses in the 1990s, the DRC started to teach their students that women may hold the church offices. My question is whether the defense of this view was ever carefully and properly explained and taught to the student. It does not appear so. Also, how many ministers take the time to explain and defend to their congregations why at least some believe that women may hold the church office? Oh yeah, I'm in a hurry, Reverend Pastor. 15 minutes, Reverend. When I watch comments by the DRC members and pastors, this is abundantly clear. Ferdinand tells us that it was after he went overseas that he had to deal with the great complementarian theologian's works and position. And now he also holds the complementarian position. Overseas, it seems, when one investigates this issue, as though most conservatives, the overwhelming majority of conservative Christians, are complementarian. How many ministers, old and young, have ever heard, seen, or read a proper, thorough explanation defending women in the church office? How many would, even after receiving such an explanation, in any way change their position, or even just understand or admit that the egalitarian position can be biblically defended and justified? I want to ask how credible or even of credible the comments of even the above ministers and students regarding this issue would be. Their comments would also not make their positions or views regarding this issue true or false. Their comments would not make this true or false, it's already true or false. How many people still actually believe what the minister or pastor teach? But what if the minister or pastor teaches heresy? What do our people anyway learn in our churches? How many actually still really learn anything about our faith? Most actually do not want to, do they? And you can see this clearly when you talk to ministers. You have 20 minutes a week. And if it's a teenager ministry or whatever, it's every 2-3 weeks, sometimes 10 minutes. No, you do not teach the people because their concentration is flat out gone. They don't have concentration. They can't concentrate on anything. As soon as you talk about God. What do our people learn? And also, the church has the kids for Sunday school, and then we have the catechism class in the Dutch Reformed Church. There's nothing else. How many people will sit if a minister says at times, sorry, but this now is a teaching sermon, and it will take 40 minutes or 50 minutes. Or even sometimes, sorry, the next service, or there's a teaching event before the church, before the service, and you have to be there. Very few people. Most will leave the church anyway. Fourth, and what do our children learn at Sunday school? And from a certain stage up, what are they learning at all? And then they leave the faith in droves. And when they get to catechism class, they do not learn how to defend our faith, their faith, the faith that we learned from the Bible. Fourth, Ferdinand's wife is in a profession. She may live out her profession. She is not prohibited from living out her profession. Some people say that teachers and medical doctors have callings. Today there are, and have been for a while, female medical doctors. And for a longer while, or longer period, female teachers. Women may live out these callings. But what then of God's calling of people to the church offices, ministers, pastors, and elders? Or is there no such thing? I have questions on this. Or is it just that God will not call a woman to these offices? This is what the Church of England in South Africa believes. But then on the other side is Calvin, who said that God has done it and he may do it. I discussed it in one of my theses. Very nice. Which is true. Rai Rai Ripa. Guess, guess, guess. God may, but we can then reject them. To hell with God and who he chooses. Oops. Nice, nah. Very nice. It is very, very nice to approach people who do not have the same God's calling and may also live out their own callings for commentary. But if a woman has the God's calling to be a real minister and pastor, and according to Calvin, God may do it, or elder, and that means to preach and teach in the gatherings, the services, the official ones, then it's suddenly to stop her because she's a woman. Women and even men who do not have a clue what it is to walk around with God's calling on your heart or without God's calling on your heart must be approached very, very carefully for comment. And also, they must be very, very careful and think before they comment on this issue. And now, according to children's ministry or women's ministry, is not the same as a calling to be a true minister or pastor or elder. Oh, I like children's ministry or women's ministry, and it is my calling. So then it must also be the calling of all women. When other women therefore have or receive a so-called calling, it must therefore be the same as mine. Last, concerning my use of Giles. Giles, an egalitarian, and Kostenberger, a complementarian, and Ferdinand uses him, comprehensively discussed and opposed each other's views in a series of journal articles. Also, Giles is often branded as liberal by complementarians. He is often shown as an example of trajectory hermeneutics. He is used as an example of someone who wants women allowed in the church offices and also wanting homosexuality accepted as right. But I found one article by him. Now, the source information can be found on one of the slides in one of my videos. I used him as in one of my theses, in which Giles thoroughly investigates these two issues, of course within the word limits. Right at the end, and I mean right at the end of the article, he offers his conclusion that homosexuality can in no way be biblically justified, and that homosexuals may not hold church offices, but that women may hold church offices, and that this view can be biblically justified. Now then, what Giles there struggles with is how the church should then treat homosexuals. And it is a problematic thing for me as well, because I have homosexuals in my family and amongst my friends. How do you treat? I do not know whether Giles has since changed his positions regarding these issues, but that specific journal article was insightful and it refutes his critics' claims. Now, I did my best in my thesis and in this video series. What is God's truth on this? Guess, guess, guess. What does the church believe? Guess, guess, guess. What does the DRC believe? And I can ask, guess, guess, guess. What does the mourners believe? Guess, guess, guess. In Afrikaans, rai, rai, ripa. Thank you for watching this. Till the next time.